While most people imagine Africa's languages are flourishing in a continent famed for its diversity, the reality is far more dramatic. Hundreds of African languages are vanishing at an unprecedented rate, while only a select few are expanding their reach. Contrary to popular belief, Africa's linguistic landscape is being transformed by powerful global and local forces, and the pace of this change is accelerating right now. Before we dive in, I want to invite you to be part of this journey. When you subscribe, like, or share, you're not just supporting a channel, you're helping to safeguard the voices and stories that might otherwise disappear. Your engagement directly fuels a community dedicated to preserving Africa's heritage and ensures these vital narratives reach people who care. If you believe in the power of language to connect generations and cultures, hit subscribe and let's make a difference together. Let's start by setting the scene. Africa is home to an extraordinary tapestry of languages. According to recent UNESCO data, over 2,000 languages are spoken across the continent, making it the most linguistically diverse region on the planet. These languages are not simply tools for communication. They are living archives of history, tradition, and identity. From the deserts of the Sahara to the forests of the Congo Basin, each language encodes unique worldviews, oral histories, and social structures, reflecting the continent's intricate mosaic of cultures. Yet beneath this surface of diversity, a stark reality is emerging. Up to 10% of African languages, potentially more than 200, could disappear within the next century, as estimated by UNESCO. Globally, at least 40% of the world's 7,000 languages are endangered, and Africa is no exception. The continent's complex multilingualism, often seen as a strength, makes it especially vulnerable to language loss as smaller communities face mounting pressure to abandon their mother tongues in favor of more dominant languages. What does it mean for a language to die? It's not just about words fading from memory. When a language disappears, an entire worldview vanishes, oral histories, myths, genealogies, and the subtle ways people interpret their environment. Indigenous languages are the keepers of ancestral knowledge, and their loss severs the connection between generations, eroding the sense of belonging and identity that binds communities together. The disappearance of a language can mean the loss of traditional ecological knowledge, medicinal practices, and unique ways of resolving conflict. To understand the urgency, let's look at some of the most rapidly dying languages in Africa today. The Jim language in the Central African Republic is classified as critically endangered, with only a handful of elderly speakers remaining. The Ukwejo language faces a similar fate, its speakers now counted in the dozens. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Yungom language is under threat, while the Yulu language is also endangered. These are not isolated cases. Across rural regions from the Kwilu-Kasai area to the edges of the Sahara, languages are teetering on the brink of extinction. Some, like Zam, have already vanished, their last speakers gone and their stories lost to time. Why is this happening? The roots of Africa's language crisis stretch back to the colonial era. When European powers divided the continent, they imposed their own languages, English, French, Portuguese, on education, government, and commerce. Colonial policies deliberately sidelined indigenous languages, relegating them to the private sphere while elevating European tongues as the keys to power and progress. As a result, entire generations grew up believing their mother tongues were obstacles rather than assets. This linguistic hierarchy did not disappear with independence. In many African countries, colonial languages remain the official medium of instruction in schools, the language of government, and the gateway to economic opportunity. For families seeking upward mobility, the pressure to adopt English or French is immense. Over time, this has weakened the intergenerational transmission of indigenous languages, as parents prioritize global languages in hopes of securing a better future for their children. Reports from the African Academy of Languages indicate that this shift is especially pronounced among urban and educated populations, who often see global languages as markers of status and opportunity. The impact is visible in the numbers. Swahili, for example, is one of the most widely spoken languages in Africa, with estimates ranging from 50 million to 150 million speakers. Yoruba boasts around 45 million speakers, Fula about 35 million, and Igbo approximately 30 million. These major languages continue to thrive, but they are the exception rather than the rule. The vast majority of African languages are spoken by small communities, often numbering in the thousands or even hundreds. For these languages, the forces of globalization, urbanization, and education policy can be overwhelming. Recent UNESCO reports highlight the urgency of the situation. Without intervention, language loss could triple within the next 40 years. With at least one language disappearing every month, the consequences are not just cultural, they are economic and political as well. When a language dies, so too does a unique way of organizing society, resolving conflict, and managing resources. The loss of linguistic diversity can undermine social cohesion and limit the creative potential of entire nations. To understand the scale of this transformation, let's look at the broader historical and geopolitical context. During the colonial period, European powers used language as a tool of control, establishing schools and administrations that operated exclusively in colonial languages. This policy was not only about communication, it was about shaping minds and identities. Indigenous languages were often dismissed as primitive or backward, and their speakers were encouraged or compelled to abandon them in favor of the language of the colonizer. This legacy persists today, with many African countries still using colonial languages as their official languages, even decades after independence. But the story doesn't end there. In the decades following independence, some African nations attempted to promote indigenous languages as symbols of national identity and unity. However, these efforts often faced significant challenges, including limited resources, lack of standardized writing systems, and resistance from populations who had come to associate global languages with opportunity and progress. As a result, the dominance of colonial languages has remained largely unchallenged, even as the continent's linguistic diversity continues to erode. Let's pause to consider the case of French in Africa, a language that once seemed unassailable in its influence. For decades, French served as the lingua franca of West and Central Africa, a legacy of colonial rule. But today, the status of French is under threat, and the reasons are as much political as they are linguistic. Observers note a growing wave of anti-France sentiment across the continent. In countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Central African Republic, public opinion has shifted sharply against France's continued involvement in African affairs. This sentiment is not just about politics, it extends to language and culture. Many Africans now see the French language as a symbol of colonial domination, an obstacle to true independence and self-determination. As a result, governments are increasingly prioritizing their own national languages, and the use of French is declining in schools, media, and public life. France's own foreign and linguistic policies have also contributed to this decline. As African nations assert their autonomy, the old model of francophone cooperation is losing its appeal. The shift is especially pronounced among younger generations, who are more likely to embrace English, Arabic, or indigenous languages as vehicles for global engagement and cultural pride. This trend is not limited to a few countries. It is part of a broader continental movement toward linguistic and cultural self-determination. But is English the solution? In many ways, English has become the new gatekeeper to education, employment, and international opportunity. Its dominance is growing not just in former British colonies, but across the continent. English is now the language of business, science, and popular culture, and mastery of English is often seen as essential for success in the modern world. Yet the rise of English brings its own set of challenges. Linguistic imperialism, the process by which one language gains dominance at the expense of others, can limit opportunities for speakers of indigenous languages. When English becomes the default language in schools and workplaces, those who are not fluent can find themselves excluded from key aspects of society. This can deepen existing inequalities and erode the cultural richness that comes from linguistic diversity. Academic studies confirm that English is becoming dominant in many formerly colonized countries, often at the expense of local languages. Moreover, the adoption of a unified language policy is not a panacea. Reports indicate that promoting a single or few dominant languages can undermine functional literacy, as students often do not use these languages in daily conversation. Language policies that prioritize colonial or dominant languages risk marginalizing local languages and cultures, leading to resistance from communities who feel their identities are being erased. Implementing a unified language policy is also fraught with practical challenges. Africa's nations are incredibly diverse, each with its own unique cultural and political context. A one-size-fits-all approach rarely works. Lack of resources, including trained personnel and funding, can hinder the effective implementation of language policies. Some countries hesitate to adopt unified linguistic policies due to concerns about cultural identity and inclusivity. There is also the risk of missing out on economic and regional integration opportunities by failing to adopt regionally relevant languages like Swahili. Overly centralized language policies may actually hinder national growth compared to more flexible, multilingual approaches. The key, many experts argue, is to strike a balance between embracing global languages for economic advancement and preserving indigenous languages for cultural continuity. Let's take a closer look at the economic effects of this language shift. Moving from indigenous to dominant languages like English or French can increase economic opportunities by facilitating participation in international trade and negotiations. Mastery of these languages is often seen as a valuable asset in accessing broader economic systems and markets. Economic growth and globalization are major drivers of language shift from indigenous to dominant languages. However, the retention of colonial languages has also been linked to economic challenges in some post-colonial African countries. The decline in indigenous language use is particularly notable among middle to upper-class populations who are more likely to prioritize global languages for their children. Yet, indigenous languages play a crucial role in harnessing national productive capacities and can contribute to economic development if revitalized. The economic benefits of saving and revitalizing indigenous languages are still debated, but some argue that they can positively impact national economies by fostering innovation and social cohesion. In countries where indigenous languages have been integrated into education and public life, there are signs of increased community engagement and resilience, suggesting that linguistic diversity can be an asset rather than a liability. Amid these challenges, there are glimmers of hope. Dedicated efforts are underway to document, maintain, and revive endangered and even once extinct African languages. UNESCO's Language Vitality and Endangerment Framework is being used to assess the status of African languages like Hadza, and activists are increasingly turning to online tools to help preserve endangered languages. In Kenya, for example, artificial intelligence is being considered as a solution for endangered language documentation and revitalization. AI technologies offer significant opportunities for revitalizing and preserving endangered African languages. They can help address challenges such as insufficient documentation, low digital literacy, and cultural marginalization. Modern AI tools can record and analyze speech, create digital dictionaries, and even generate educational materials in endangered languages. By leveraging technology, communities can ensure that their languages are not only preserved, but also adapted for use in the digital age. But technology alone is not enough. The preservation of Africa's linguistic heritage requires political will, community engagement, and sustained investment. It also demands a shift in mindset, a recognition that linguistic diversity is not a barrier to progress, but a source of strength and resilience. To deepen our understanding, let's explore more regional case studies and local initiatives. In the Central African Republic, the Jim language is on the verge of extinction. Its speakers are elderly, and the language is rarely used in public life. Efforts to document and revitalize Jime have faced significant challenges, including limited resources and a lack of institutional support. Yet, local activists are working to record oral histories and create educational materials in the language, hoping to spark renewed interest among younger generations. In the Kasai region, researchers have documented the decline of several indigenous languages, driven by the dominance of colonial languages and national language policies. Here, as in many parts of Africa, the primary contributors to language loss are not the replacement by other African languages, but the overwhelming influence of English, French, and Portuguese. National policies that prioritize official languages like Amharic can also contribute to the marginalization of smaller languages. The story is similar in other parts of the continent. In Nigeria, for example, the Igbo language is considered vulnerable, though not critically threatened. Revitalization initiatives are underway, supported by UNESCO and local organizations, to promote the use of Igbo in schools and media. These efforts are part of a broader movement to recognize the value of linguistic diversity and to resist the homogenizing pressures of globalization. Observers note that the vitality and social life of African languages are often assessed using international frameworks and standards. The Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity recognizes the link between biodiversity, cultural diversity, and linguistic diversity, highlighting the importance of preserving all three for the health of the planet. Natural World Heritage sites in Africa that include indigenous language speakers offer opportunities to conserve both language and culture, creating spaces where traditional knowledge can be passed on to future generations. But the challenges are immense. The shift to dominant languages has accelerated since the colonial era, often at the expense of indigenous languages. Economic growth and globalization continue to drive this trend as families seek to equip their children with the skills needed to succeed in a rapidly changing world. The decline in indigenous language use is particularly pronounced among urban and educated populations, who are more likely to adopt global languages as markers of status and opportunity. At the same time, there is growing recognition of the value of multilingualism. Flexible language policies that embrace both global and indigenous languages can foster social cohesion, economic development, and cultural resilience. Some countries are experimenting with bilingual or trilingual education models, seeking to balance the demands of globalization with the need to preserve local heritage. The role of technology in this process cannot be overstated. AI and digital tools are making it possible to document and teach endangered languages at a scale never before imagined. In Kenya, for example, AI-powered language apps are being used to create digital archives of endangered languages, making them accessible to new generations of speakers. These tools can also help bridge the gap between oral and written traditions, ensuring that even languages without a formal writing system can be preserved for posterity. Yet, technology is not a silver bullet. The success of language preservation efforts depends on community engagement and political support. Governments must recognize the value of linguistic diversity and invest in policies that promote the use of indigenous languages in education, media, and public life. Communities must be empowered to take ownership of their linguistic heritage, creating spaces where languages can thrive and evolve. Let's revisit the decline of French in Africa, as it offers important lessons for the continent as a whole. The waning influence of French is not just a linguistic phenomenon, it is a reflection of broader socio-political dynamics. As African nations assert their independence and prioritize their own national interests, the old colonial order is being challenged. Language is at the heart of this transformation, serving as both a symbol of resistance and a tool for empowerment. Public sentiment in many African nations reflects a desire for greater autonomy from former colonial influences, including France. This has led to a decline in the use of French in schools, government, and media, as well as a renewed emphasis on indigenous languages and cultural identity. The shift is especially pronounced among young people, who are more likely to see French as a relic of the past rather than a pathway to the future. France's own foreign and linguistic policies have also played a role in this decline. As African nations seek to redefine their relationships with the rest of the world, the appeal of Francophone cooperation has diminished. Instead, countries are looking to regional and global partners, embracing languages like English, Arabic, and Swahili as vehicles for international engagement. This brings us back to the question of whether English is the solution. While English offers undeniable advantages in terms of global communication and economic opportunity, its dominance can also exacerbate existing inequalities and erode cultural diversity. The challenge for Africa is to find a way to harness the benefits of global languages without sacrificing the richness of its own linguistic heritage. The debate over unified language policies is ongoing. Some argue that adopting a single language could promote national unity and facilitate economic development. Others warn that such policies risk marginalizing minority languages and cultures, leading to social fragmentation and loss of identity. The reality is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Each country must navigate its own unique linguistic landscape, balancing the demands of globalization with the need to preserve local heritage. In this context, the potential of AI and technology is both exciting and daunting. On the one hand, digital tools offer unprecedented opportunities to document, teach, and revitalize endangered languages. On the other hand, there is a risk that technology could accelerate the dominance of global languages, further marginalizing smaller tongues. The key is to use technology as a tool for empowerment, not erasure, ensuring that all languages have a place in the digital age. To deepen our understanding, let's explore some lesser-known revitalization efforts and policy debates across the continent. In South Africa, for instance, the government has recognized 11 official languages, reflecting a commitment to linguistic diversity. However, implementation remains uneven, with English and Afrikaans still dominating many spheres of public life. In Ethiopia, Amharic is the official language, but there are ongoing debates about how to protect and promote the country's many other languages, such as Oromo and Tigrinya. In Cameroon, grassroots organizations are working to document and teach endangered languages like Baka and Mfumti, often using mobile technology and community radio. Academic studies highlight the importance of community-led initiatives in language preservation. In Ghana, local groups have established language nests, immersion programs where children learn their ancestral languages from elders. In Tanzania, Swahili has been promoted as a unifying national language, but efforts are also underway to revitalize smaller languages like Hadza and Sandawe. These examples show that successful language preservation requires both top-down policy support and bottom-up community engagement. The economic implications of language loss are complex and multifaceted. On one hand, proficiency in global languages can open doors to international markets and opportunities. On the other, the decline of indigenous languages can undermine social cohesion and limit access to traditional knowledge systems that are vital for sustainable development. Some researchers argue that multilingualism can enhance cognitive flexibility and creativity, providing a competitive advantage in a rapidly changing world. Others caution that the marginalization of minority languages can lead to social exclusion and conflict, particularly in regions where language is closely tied to ethnic identity. Recent research in psychology and linguistics has begun to shed light on the cognitive benefits of multilingualism. Studies have shown that individuals who speak multiple languages often demonstrate greater mental flexibility, problem-solving skills, and even delayed onset of age-related cognitive decline. In African contexts where code switching and multilingualism are everyday realities, these cognitive advantages can translate into social and economic benefits. For example, children educated in both their mother tongue and a global language often outperform peers who are taught exclusively in a foreign language, according to UNESCO-backed studies. This suggests that preserving indigenous languages is not just a matter of cultural pride, but also a practical strategy for building resilient, adaptable societies. Let's take a closer look at how language policies play out on the ground. In Mozambique, Portuguese is the official language, but more than 40 indigenous languages are spoken across the country. Recent government initiatives have introduced bilingual education in select regions, allowing children to learn in both Portuguese and their mother tongue. Early results indicate improved literacy rates and stronger community engagement. In Senegal, French remains the language of government and education, but Wolof is widely spoken in daily life and increasingly used in media and local administration. This dual-language reality reflects the balancing act many African countries face as they seek to modernize without losing touch with their roots. Regional organizations are also stepping up. The African Union has called for the promotion of African languages as a means of fostering unity and development. The Pan-African Language Board is working to standardize and promote major regional languages like Swahili, Hausa, and Amharic, while also supporting the documentation of endangered languages. These efforts are gaining momentum, but challenges remain, especially in securing funding and political commitment. International partnerships are proving valuable as well. UNESCO, in collaboration with African universities and local NGOs, has launched language documentation projects in countries like Chad, Namibia, and Madagascar. These initiatives train local researchers to record oral histories, compile dictionaries, and develop teaching materials. The involvement of community members ensures that preservation efforts are culturally sensitive and sustainable. Technology is rapidly changing the landscape of language preservation. In Nigeria, a startup has developed an app that allows users to learn and practice endangered languages through interactive lessons and games. In South Africa, a digital archive collects stories, songs, and proverbs in multiple indigenous languages, making them accessible to students and researchers worldwide. AI-powered speech recognition tools are being piloted in Kenya and Ghana to transcribe and analyze oral traditions, helping to create searchable databases for future generations. Despite these advances, there are still significant hurdles. Many endangered languages lack a standardized writing system, making documentation difficult. Low levels of digital literacy in some rural areas limit the reach of online tools. Political instability and conflict can disrupt preservation projects, as seen in parts of the Central African Republic and South Sudan. Funding remains a perennial challenge, with many initiatives relying on short-term grants or volunteer labor. The relationship between African ethnic groups and language preservation is a crucial part of this story. Indigenous languages preserve oral histories, myths, and genealogies, reinforcing ethnic identity and heritage. Language connects individuals to their ancestors, strengthening their sense of belonging within the community. Maintaining indigenous languages affirms group identity and continuity across generations, providing a foundation for resilience in the face of rapid social and economic change. Looking beyond the continent, Africa's language crisis is not unique. Across Asia and the Americas, similar patterns of language loss are unfolding. In India, for example, hundreds of languages are at risk as Hindi and English gain ground. In Latin America, indigenous languages like Quechua and Nahuatl face pressure from Spanish and Portuguese. These global parallels highlight the scale of the challenge and the importance of international collaboration in language preservation. Reports from the Endangered Languages Project emphasize that language loss is a worldwide phenomenon, but also that revitalization efforts can succeed when communities, governments, and technology work together. Another underreported angle is the role of Africa's diaspora communities in language preservation. Across Europe, North America, and the Middle East, African migrants and their descendants are working to keep their ancestral languages alive. Community centers in London, Paris, and Toronto host language classes and cultural events, while online forums connect speakers across continents. In some cases, diaspora communities have even played a leading role in revitalization, producing digital content, children's books, and audio resources that are later adopted back in Africa. This transnational exchange is creating new opportunities for language survival and adaptation, and it demonstrates that Africa's linguistic future is not confined to the continent alone. Turning to North Africa, the story of Arabic and Berber languages offers additional insight. Arabic, while not originally native to Africa, has become deeply rooted in North African societies, yet Berber languages such as Tamazight have faced marginalization for generations. Recent policy changes in Morocco and Algeria have granted Tamazight official status and expanded its use in education and media. These reforms have sparked renewed pride among Berber communities and set a precedent for the recognition of minority languages elsewhere on the continent. According to a 2023 report by the International Organization of La Francophonie, these shifts are being closely watched by policymakers across Africa. Southern Africa presents another instructive case. In Namibia, the government has made efforts to promote indigenous languages alongside English, which remains the official language. Community radio stations broadcast in Oshiwambo, Herero, and Nama, helping to keep these languages vibrant. In Botswana, Setswana is the national language, but smaller languages like Kalanga and San are being revitalized through school programs and cultural festivals. These regional examples show that with the right mix of policy support, community action, and technological innovation, language loss can be slowed or even reversed. The impact of language loss is not limited to culture and identity. It also affects governance and conflict resolution. In multilingual societies, language policy can be a source of tension or a tool for peacebuilding. In Rwanda, for example, the post-genocide government adopted English as an official language alongside Kinyarwanda and French, aiming to foster national unity and international integration. While this policy has had mixed results, it illustrates the complex interplay between language, politics, and reconciliation. As we look to the future, the choices made by African governments, communities, and individuals will shape the continent's linguistic landscape for generations to come. Will Africa embrace multilingualism as a source of strength, or will it succumb to the pressures of homogenization and language loss? The answer will determine not only Africa's cultural future, but also its economic and political trajectory in the global order. Preserving Africa's languages is about more than words. It is about identity, belonging, and the power to shape one's own destiny. By valuing and investing in linguistic diversity, Africa can build a future that is both connected to the world and rooted in its own unique traditions. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you see as the greatest challenge or opportunity in preserving Africa's languages? Is it technology, policy, community action, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this vital conversation going.